to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast. We are chatting about culture this month, and we've had several culture conversations about what culture is and how you create it. And I have a very, very, very special guest with me on the podcast today. And Tanya and I met at the Wisconsin SHRM Conference last year. And at that conference, Tanya was doing a presentation very specifically on culture and how you create culture and all the fun things that they do at Paradigm to create their cultures. So again, with me today is Tanya Hanson, who's the HR director at Paradigm. So Tanya, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on today. I'm excited to be here and talk about culture.
Absolutely. So here's something that I loved from what your conversation was last year and really took away from it is you've got very specific kind of items you want to create around your culture, yet you are always in conversation with your staff, right? And, you know, how we define culture here at ETC is culture is the behaviors that you allow or don't allow inside your organization. And what I heard you talk about so much is you're supporting the behaviors that you want always publicly, and then you'll have those side conversations.
Yeah, it's not something that you can dictate. So it's something that has to just grow. And there's just like with anything else that grows in the world, right? There's ways to help it grow. And so, as you mentioned, by making things more public, by sharing the good things that are happening, sharing the good activities that employees and managers are doing, you can really help flourish some of those behaviors. And we like to allow our employees to kind of show us what direction they want to take things and what direction they want to go, because we've learned over the years that it can't be something that's handed out kind of as like a large corporate initiative or a blanket across the organization. It really is something that, as you mentioned, it's the behaviors and actions. And we are just, HR, the leadership team, we're just a small group of that overall organization. So it's the behaviors and actions of our larger team that dictate our culture.
And what I know is that every team kind of has their own culture, but every person has a specific need. And what I loved about our conversations, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, and it's not necessarily important, but the racetrack guy, who everything he did was walking, right? He got everything done on the phone. I know the last time we chatted, you're like, we just promoted him, but we were allowing him to be him. And the culture we're creating is supporting our staff. So do you want to tell us more about that?
Yeah.
It's so personal.
So we have one employee who, and this is pre-pandemic that he really did this a lot, but instead of sitting in his cubicle, he just paced the building over and over. He would just continually pace the building. He'd take his meetings pacing the building, and he would, whether it was on the phone or in person, they would just keep walking. And that's what worked for him. It allowed him kind of that, the looseness of his body to provide some creative space. And he felt more comfortable. You could see him engaging in the conversations. His arms would be going and things like that. And is it untraditional for someone to walk around and do that? Yeah, absolutely. But it is fine for people to have differences in their work styles. It's great that we have a building that allows that flexibility. There's a lot of different spaces people can go into and work in an area or in a manner that works best for them. Now, post-pandemic, right? A little bit of a different world in that there's a little bit less people in the building on a regular basis. It's more of, kind of a haven when people want to have group meetings or that face-to-face opportunity. But even our employees, like right now, I'm sitting in a bedroom, right? Like I have the ability to work in a space that works for me. It doesn't necessarily have to be a desk and a chair with a corkboard behind me or something like that. As a company, we think it's important to let people work in a way that works for them.
Absolutely. And that's become so important, especially as, the great debate right now is, do we force them to come back to work or don't we? How do we allow collaboration? When does collaboration occur? Like all the things, right?
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see how companies and management really adapts and evolves. I personally love it. I think that there's an opportunity for real management to grow and to start at a lot of organizations now. It's not like button chair management anymore. You have to actually really being engaged with your employees and understand what they're doing and start to really evaluate their work product. It's a little bit different way to look at it. We love that at Paradigm. I think that it is a best practice really in a management approach. And it's just forced it a little bit faster than it probably would have happened without a pandemic.
And I love that. I love you just said we're going to have real management. And so how do you define real management? And then I've got a follow-up question for that.
Yeah. I think that it starts with knowing your employees. You have to learn their strengths, their weaknesses. We use the DISC profiling at Paradigm as a workplace communication tool. And it's meant to help people understand how you can shift your own communication styles to others to really get aligned and get to the end result. You can't do that when it's really surface level. So I think that there's a lot of management. I'm not saying at Paradigm, I'm saying in general, like in the world, there's a lot of management that used to be, I see you in your chair from 8 to 5, and that means you're an employee putting in the work. I'm not necessarily engaging with you to make sure that you're working efficiently, effectively, that you're finding joy and purpose in your work, because that makes a more productive employee. So when you don't have that luxury of seeing someone sitting there doing the work, you have to engage with them on a little bit different of a level. And so this has allowed a lot of that opportunity for organizations. And I think that it's shifted the way that management has to occur. And on the flip side, I think employees are expecting a different type of a manager now too, where they're wanting a little bit more of that alignment of what they're actually doing and capable of. And it's driving for more work productivity and a better culture.
Absolutely. And so you just hit on the question I was going to name is, what is the culture you need to create for real management to actually happen?
Yeah, I think there's a few different pieces, and they really go back to kind of those basic needs, the safety, the belonging. If you have some of those key things in place, it allows for a little bit more of like an open conversation, and it allows for some of those nuances, those personal pieces of culture to kind of emerge out. So going back to the racetrack, right? It allows for things like that. Or, maybe someone has a preference, maybe someone's not a morning person and they want to be able to work in the afternoon. Having some of those basic needs met allows for that open conversation between a manager and an employee to have the conversation that maybe I don't start work at 8 a.m. Maybe I start at 9 a.m. and it makes me a better employee. And those type of things, those are culture building pieces because those conversations don't exist everywhere.
Absolutely. And going back to that first point is that it's personal, right? We're having the conversations and building that personal relationship with that individual to determine what is it that they need based on what drives them, what you're getting from the DISC profile. We use predictive index,
Sure.
Different way of looking at it. But, you're figuring out what exactly is it that this person naturally needs based on their natural drives. How do we then give them what they need so that they have the behaviors that the job needs in order to be successful?
Yeah. And it is so different by person. It's really easy to just look at a group of people and try and manage them the same way, but it's not a really successful approach, right? Everyone has a little bit different nuances of what they need. And if we can't adapt to that, you end up with some pretty frustrated people. And so it's really just caring, leaning in, caring and wanting to invest in your employees and looking at them as humans first to figure out what type of needs they have, what type of things motivate them, and asking those questions too, because as smart as we can get and as much as we can learn, there's nothing more valuable, I think, than actually having the conversation.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And then being able to ask the questions in somewhat of the same way so that you can actually track the data.
Sure.
Do something with it, right?
Yeah. Right. That's an interesting thing. Part of our culture is that we have a lot of feedback. And so one of the key pieces of feedback is that you have to do something with it. So to your point there, I think that's one thing that drives our culture is that when we get feedback, we're very upfront. We will do things with it that we can and some things we can't, right? There's always something that you can't do anything with, but we try really hard to make sure we're taking action on the feedback because culture, it's built off of those behaviors and those actions. And so if we asked for feedback and didn't do anything with it, that's also a type of culture then. And it's not the culture that we want because it de-incentivizes people to provide the feedback, right? And the feedback is what iterates you to make you a better environment for people.
Absolutely. And so when you look at kind of how behaviors and actions shape it, because we all know that it's not words, yet so often I think we want to fall back to words because it's easy.
Sure.
So what are some of those ways that your behaviors or your actions really shape the culture? I know we've talked about the racetrack. We've talked about, how individuals kind of get up, what that time looks like when they're in. But with those behaviors and actions, especially now that we're in a hybrid environment, and that's not going away.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the pieces that's really important in a hybrid environment is the relationship building. And some of those things, right, keeping cameras on, they seem very simple and straightforward for people, but encouraging that, normalizing it as a behavior is really important. It can help build those relationships. Things like if you say that, if you have a question, reach out to me, it's actually making time when they do reach out with that question. It's not just a quick I am back. It's picking up the phone, getting on the video call, taking the time to walk through something. Again, they seem like such small things, but these really are the pieces that build that culture where people are then, because it's learned behavior. So if someone calls and has a question, you take the time to explain it in a way that's helpful to them and they get to the understanding, they're more likely to do it in the future. They're more likely to reciprocate that behavior with someone else as well. So it's those actions that build that baseline of culture for us.
Yeah,
so it's not like big grand gestures or things like that. It's all the small things, the day in and day out actions that we do that really create the culture.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just throw out an example here too that we've seen is we have some employees that are amazingly detail oriented, right? Meaning they want things to be perfect. Well, in a virtual environment, what happens is if you want everything to be perfect, you can get in such a spin in your head, especially when you're not collaborating with other folks on a daily or weekly basis like you have in the office. So we've just instituted, we're going to meet every morning for 10 minutes. What are you working on? What's holding you up? Oh my gosh, so much more engaged. And we know what's happening and it's just that simple. And it's like, well, 10 minutes every day, but it's like, well, we were spending it in the office anyway. So like, what's the difference? It's giving them what they need so they're not stuck in perfection and spinning out on that and getting frustrated and disengaged.
I totally agree with that. A quick alignment is always a really great thing. Another point with that is about the ability to make mistakes, right? I think that's a huge culture piece too. And so part of how we try and normalize that in our day to day is that we share examples of mistakes that are made. It's not, I've heard, I guess, I've never been part of this kind of a company, but where they do it like on a big platform, company meetings, they stand up, they talk about their mistakes, they clap, that kind of thing. I think that would be very intimidating for a lot of people, but on a little bit smaller scale, right? You can do that in team meetings. You can do that in one-on-ones with folks when they're telling you about something that didn't go well, to share an example of where like maybe you've made a mistake along those lines. It just makes it okay, makes it a little bit more human, again, builds more pieces of that culture because it shows us that we're all people too. And I think that's a really important thing, especially when you have someone who's really caught up in making sure everything is perfect, letting them know that if a mistake is made, it's not the end of the world. We just have to grow and move past it.
Right. And it's like mistakes are the springboard for our success. That's
absolutely. Absolutely. Nothing great was ever made without a mistake. So
no. And we don't learn from getting things right.
No, you really don't, right? Like you learn from doing things wrong and from trying to figure out how to make it better. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that, we had chatted about before, and I love this, and this was like such a light bulb, like, aha. And, when I heard you speaking last year, and it was culture in pockets is great. It's not a blanket for a company. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've never heard it that way before. And like, it was so profound to me that I would love for you to
Yeah, we're all individuals, right? If you take us out of the work environment and you put us in our personal lives, we're not all doing the same things on nights and weekends. And so it would be interesting if in the workplace, we all felt like doing the same things all day long, right? Like it doesn't translate like that. And so when we look at culture, like it has to be in pockets because people have different personalities. They have different things that they're interested in. And so we encourage the development of different pockets of culture. Different teams have cultures on their team. Different divisions have it. Even cross departments, we have groups of people that get together for different activities. And as a company, we like to support that because it goes back to that basic relationship building. And when employees feel like they're part of something bigger, they perform better. They're more productive. They're more happy. And that's a win-win for both the employee as a person and the company. And so anything we can do, big or small, to encourage people to really develop pockets that are of interest to them, it seems like an easy win for us.
So what are some examples of culture packets that you've created?
We haven't necessarily created them. Our employees really tend to create these. We have groups that get together that play games to raise money for charity. We have groups that get together that do tailgating things. We have groups that get together who share their love of project management. It doesn't necessarily have to be
some of that too.
Right. It doesn't necessarily have to be a social fun badger game, but we have different groups of people who like to get together to share something they're passionate about. And sometimes it's work related, sometimes it's not. But building those relationships outside of work, they certainly translate back into the workplace.
Yeah. Lots of chatter over the last year about the Great Resignation and the Great Retention and all the things, right? And culture has a huge part to play with the alumni of our organization. And so for those listeners that haven't heard this before, we've talked about it on the podcast, but creating an alumni network of folks that have been with the organization, you're still keeping them engaged, because boomerang employees that leave and come back can be some of your best employees, right? So I'm curious, how have you created the culture to support your alumni network?
Yeah, I think the first step is treating them the same way on their exit as you did on their entrance. Right. So we celebrate when people are growing in their careers, even if that's not with us. So, helping them get to their next role, we obviously hope it can be with our company, but if not, embracing them in that and staying in contact with them. So whether that's through their relationships they've built, or we have a fun way of inviting them back to events that we do. Sometimes they get to be like the workers of events almost. And that's an opportunity for them to see their coworkers they used to work with. It's an opportunity for them to stay connected to Paradigm. And we've been really fortunate to have a lot of boomerang employees. It's one of those things that some of the wisdom they bring back with them is things you'd love to really caption and share with employees so that they can understand just how special it is here. But it's something that sometimes you have to learn, but we do welcome folks back because it is great to have boomerang employees come back for sure.
Awesome. So anything else on culture that you want to share before we start to land the plane?
I think that sometimes people try and boil the ocean with culture, and it is an ocean and you can't boil it. So just start small, start today. It doesn't require you to be super schooled in any one type of discipline. It just requires you to be willing to try and be willing to fail and be willing to try again. And I think that if you go in with that mindset that you're just doing it until you get something that sticks, it's a lot easier to help culture grow.
So what is one small thing someone could do today? Because I can just hear some listeners in my head going, but what is it? What is one thing? It's well, there's a bunch. So
there's a bunch. So my absolute favorite is going back old school here. And it's grabbing a card, just grab any greeting card and write a note to someone. It could be someone you just heard some really good feedback on, thanking them for whatever it was that you heard the feedback about. It could be thanking somebody for the time they've put in, someone who's been with your company a couple of years. It could be celebrating. Maybe you saw somebody got a new dog, right? They adopted a dog. Maybe sending a note saying congrats on the new member to your family. Taking the time to write that handwritten note and send it out. It's maybe 5 minutes, but it has such a big impact and it lasts with people because it's personal. You took time to do it. It wasn't something that was just like a quick click in an Amazon cart, right? It meant something. It actually resonates really well with people and it's so simple.
Right. Absolutely. Because you're sharing a bit of you with them.
Yeah.
It takes thought, right?
Yeah. It's just a little bit more human.
Yeah, I love it. And we had chatted before and I was joking about how my team was laughing at me because in July I was still sending out cards with Santa stamps on them. So Santa stamps are okay in July.
Yes, I think that's great, right? They make some associations with it. If you have a certain type of card you send, people might see it in someone's space and they know that you got a card, right? It almost becomes like a thing then.
Right, for sure. So what's a key takeaway for our executives and our CEOs listening in today?
So I thought about this and it's less of an action and more of an ask. And the ask is go to your leaders, go to your HR department, challenge them to come up with an employee engagement, a culture building idea. Pick a date next week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It doesn't matter. Pick a date. Ask them to come back to you with an idea. And when they come back, say yes. Whatever it is, say yes. It might fail, it might succeed, but what you're doing, your action, your intentional behavior is encouraging someone to be creative and to invest in the culture, to invest in the engagement. And that behavior starts to build the culture. So by doing this today, you actually are putting together a piece of culture. And it's so simple. It's just a question.
I love it, especially when you tie it back to your core values, right?
Yeah,
or when they do.
Absolutely.
Right? It's so fun. Awesome. And what's a takeaway for HR?
A takeaway for HR, don't be afraid to put things on the table. So you don't know what you can do until you can ask. And I think that sometimes we can be self-limiting because maybe it's something we haven't done before, or we don't think there's budget for it. We don't think that there's an employee appetite for it, but you don't know until you try. So take all the crazy ideas, all the wild thoughts, put them on the table and see what you can make resonate with someone. There's a lot of creative HR folks out there. And I think that sometimes we just have to break the boundaries of some of those boxes that we think we live in.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love it. Tanya, thank you so much for being with us and sharing a bit of your story and a paradigm story of how you built that culture within the organization. Because if you have not had a chance to see Tanya speak, she was just at the SHRM conference that was last week by the time this will drop. So make sure that you check those out because they are fantastic. And
Thank you.
And I know, Tanya, you're like, I'm a practitioner, I'm not a speaker, but oh my goodness, like the wisdom that oozes is amazing, right? And be sure to check out our membership program here at Elevated Talent Consulting. So if you're looking for that HR expert in your back pocket of just bouncing things off of with other HR professionals, check out that membership program. And we have those live office hours every Monday from 1 to 2 Central. So thank you so much for being with us, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.